So we are down here by the beautiful banks of the mighty Sullivan's Creek, and we're joined by Mr. Fred Smith, singer-songwriter and international man of mystery. And just my own introduction to you, Fred, was about 20 years ago. I was driving my car to work. I had community radio on, and they put this song on, which was going into incredible detail about the Civil War in the Solomon Islands. And I thought, who's this maniac writing country songs about these conflicts that no one aside from I felt like you and me knew a damn thing about them. Obviously, more people than you and me knew about them. But so can you tell us how you started going to war zones and meeting not only our participants in them, but also the locals there and writing songs about it? How did that all come to happen?
Yeah, well, like most artistic types, I did an economics law degree and joined the Foreign Affairs Department in 1996 with, dreams of postings in Paris and New York. But it turned out I had a real problem with desk work. And in the late 90s, opportunities came up through the Australian Foreign Affairs Department to work in Bougainville after the conflict there, which of course is the easternmost province of Papua New Guinea, and shortly afterwards the Solomon Islands, when ethnic tensions blew out in October, November of 2000, and they were sort of peace monitoring operations. Truce peace agreements had been struck, and civilians were sent there alongside, in the case of Bougainville, armed forces. In the case of the Solomons, our police, to monitor the peace process. And it was also around that time that I developed a songwriting problem. And I'll be very, very honest with you here. And
you got into the community radio over in, was it Bougainville or Solomon's?
Both, actually. Yeah, I had a radio program on Radio Bougainville called Saturday Night Party, which is Papua New Guinea Pidgin for Saturday Night Party. Yeah, and we'd sing songs in Pidgin and do a show about gardening and things like that and play requests. Yeah. So yeah, I got into broadcasting because it was really about outreach. We were trying to create a psychology of trust after some very bitter civil wars, and that was not easy, and it was a very psychological process. And we were unarmed, very unusual, unarmed peace monitoring groups, but by and large, it worked. Yeah.
So can you, Bougainville isn't the only place you've been there. Can you take us through your list of conflict zones?
Yeah, so I ended up sort of developing a niche in the singer-songwriter world focused on whole of government interventions in fragile and conflict-affected states. It's sort of a bit of a niche market. But
so there's not a whole lot of market for those songs, but I'm glad somebody's actually singing them and putting them together.
Well, yeah, the competition is limited. That's one of the upsides, and but then again, it's a very small market. But yeah, that's what I've done, and so I worked in Bougainville in '99 and 2003, Solomons in 2000, and then in 2009, NATO countries were sending diplomats in to work alongside their soldiers in Afghanistan as part of a thing called a civilian surge, and Australian Foreign Ministry decided to do that. Can someone tell those ducks to shut up? Someone decided we would do the same, and so I went to Uruzgan province in the south of Afghanistan, where Australian troops were concentrated as part of, there's an international division of labour in the provinces around Afghanistan, and we took on Uruzgan, which was an obscure little province down in the south, next to Kandahar and Helmand.
But I take it the South Pacific Pidgin didn't go so well down there. But did you get onto community radio?
Not so much, mate. No. The music and the guitar turned out to be very useful in Bougainville and Solomons, because we speak a similar language, or I learned Pidgin anyway, and you could get amongst it. I could go out to villages, I could set up under a church, I could play in a school, I could play, in a helicopter pad or a football field, and people loved it, and there was more optimism. But in Uruzgan province, you never went anywhere without 12 of your closest friends in an APV, and the risk was real. And so I did play a lot of music with Afghan people, and there's a bit of footage of me on YouTube doing that. But it was a much greater cultural gap, and the security issue was more real.
But I mean, there is an issue that extreme forms of Islam have real problems with music in general, and that was kind of are definitely a factor in Afghanistan.
That's right. I've written some songs sort of exploring into some research on the musical comedy tradition of the Taliban, and I'll be performing one of those songs at a forthcoming concert. But apart from that, they're a bit humorless when it comes to music. But that said, beyond the Taliban, there's a real passion for music and poetry. They love it for all the desperation they live in. It's one of their consolations, and they have a very particular musical tradition, which is on a continuum from Central Asia through to India, and they listen to it all and love it, and I got amongst it with those guys to an extent, playing music with them, and yeah, it's when you come and go as part of an armed force, people do 6 months, 8 months, and 1 year deployments. It becomes a bit transactional for us, and they tend to see us as a sort of source of power and resources in their own struggles. But if you let your guard down and play a bit of music, suddenly you humanize yourself with them, and it did have that effect amongst those Afghans I worked with.
I guess while we're talking about Afghanistan, this country and Western countries in general have created an enormous generation of young veterans, which is something that we tend to think of veterans as old people who fought in World War II. But there's very little culture when I say culture, I'm basically talking about music or even movies surrounding what they've been through and what they've experienced. And partly because you were there, partly because you were a singer-songwriter before you went there. You're one of very few artists who's written those songs, and I know you're very heavily booked up around Anzac Day because there's a lot of families of veterans who your music really speaks to.
Yeah, that's right. Me and Eric Bogle and John Schumann are very well employed around Anzac Day, and yeah, no, 26,000 young Australians served in Uruzgan in Afghanistan, and of course, hundreds of thousands from NATO countries, including the US, and they had a very particular experience, and they do, and their families do seem to respond to my stuff. I think because the details in it, it's. I think those songs work on the detail and the accuracy and the sentiment. I attended too many wrap ceremonies for young soldiers who'd been killed, and were moved to follow up on their stories and understand what happened and tell them. And I remember when I was there, a big soldier came up to me one day and said, "Are you Fred Smith?" I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Did you write that song Dust of Uruzgan?" I said, "Mea culpa." He said, "If I get slaughtered out there, you're going to write a song about me." So it matters to the soldiers to have their stories told, and there have been occasions where I remember when I first got back, I started playing this song called "Dust of Uruzgan" about the death of a soldier named Ben Renato, a young guy killed by an IED in the Baluchi Valley in July of 2009. And as I was introducing that song, I mentioned this was a song about a young guy called Ben, and I was playing in the southeast of Melbourne, where he was from, and I mentioned his name, and a voice in the crowd said, "He's my son."
Oh, wow.
And his mother was in the audience. And I nearly fell off the stage, of course, and the bass player started crying. But I just sort of said, "Right, I've got to bloody sing it, because if she's here, she's heard the song, and she wants to hear the story told."
Now, you're obviously a lot of your stuff is very serious, but you also do a lot of party pieces. I think you've got an album called Party Pieces now that I think about it. But can you tell us how you cracked it big in Holland with the Swafflin and the Dixie?
Yeah, so obviously, it was a 50-nation international coalition, and that gave it sort of moral mass and a certain credibility, but also made for complexities and incompatible chains of command and computer systems. And as it all shook out, we worked very closely with the Dutch in Uruzgan province, and generally we got on pretty well with the Dutch, but there were some cultural problems. One was sort of fierce proclivity of the Dutchmen for wearing lycra, which was really unacceptable from the Australian soldiers' point of view, and you couldn't stop them. But the other was a Dutch cultural practice known as swaffelen. I'd never heard of it before I went over, but I showed up there, and one of the Australian soldiers said, "Hey, you're from DFAT, right? Foreign Affairs." I said, "Yeah." He said, "You got to stop those Dutchies from swaffling and the Dixies." said, no worries, mate, I'll leave it with me, I'll get on it. But I didn't know what it meant. And so I asked one of my Dutch counterparts, a Dutch diplomat named Alex, who used to work. I said, Alex, what's this swaffling business? He said, oh, it's a Dutch cultural practice. I said, really? What does it mean? He said, oh, it simply means to swing your penis backwards and forwards and bump it up against something. And I'd never, and this turns out to be, it was the new word of the year in Holland in 2009, and it became a cultural practice, when Dutch.
I mean, they get in trouble with it when they swaffle the Taj Mahal and that sort of thing. I mean, it's
Yeah, well, that's how it became very popular. Because a couple of Dutch tourists filmed themselves swaffling the Taj Mahal and put it on YouTube, and it went viral, and just started this whole craze of Dutch tourists traveling around the world swaffling national monuments like the Sphinx and the Eiffel Tower.
Now, you'll have to tell us, for those international viewers, what a Dixie is, because some of them may not know as well.
The Dixie, yeah. So the Dixie is the Portaloo. The plastic is a company, a Portaloo company in Holland. It's very popular. It's not to be confused with the Dixies from the Vietnam era, which are of course those little
your cooking tins, what you eat out of.
Exactly.
Which is exactly what I was thinking about when I first heard the song.
No. Vietnam veterans get a bit confused by that one, because I know the Dixies when I was in Bougainville were those little aluminium trays there, and I'm not to be confused with the Fred either.
the eating device.
Yeah, the ridiculous eating device.
Yes, the Australian well-made device that is used for opening in tin cans and eating with, and cleaning rifles and all sorts of other fun things. It's called the Fred, the fucking ridiculous eating device. And yes, I've still got a couple sitting in a backpack somewhere, I think.
All right. So to get back to the
we got a bit distracted by the birds.
To get back to the swaffling. So you wrote a song saying, "Please stop knocking your cocks in the toilets," and then it took off a bit.
Well, it did take off a bit, but it came a bit of a sort of a bit of a burden for me. I mean, I wrote all these brilliant songs, 7-8 minutes long, articulating the details of the conflict and what it was like there, and the great tragedy of all. But did the Dutchmen call me the Dust of Ooruzgan guy? No, I walked past and they go, "Oh, there's the Dixie guy." But I did tour Holland on the strength of it. Yeah. It's like that joke about, anyway.
Yeah. Yes, the famous fighter pilot. Yeah.
One go.
After Afghanistan, were you deployed any other conflict zones after that?
No, so I came back from, I went to Ooruzgan in 2009, 2010, went back in 2013 as the mission was closing, came back to Australia, built a show, wrote a book around the experience, and released an album called Dust of Ooruzgan, toured that for 4 or 5 years, and then come 2020, March 2020, I went back to Kabul. It seemed like the sensible thing to be doing in the middle of a pandemic, and worked in the embassy there till April, May of 2021, when the embassy closed because we thought there was some risk of the whole thing collapsing. And of course, then I went to Doha to work on a virtual remote interim embassy in July, and then in August found myself in Kabul again at the airport working on a horrendous evacuation. And I mean, I know a lot of UK soldiers, American soldiers, Australian soldiers were involved, and those stories will never be the same. It was just, I'd never seen that level of human desperation as what I saw at the gates of Kabul International Airport, with thousands of Afghans pushing and shoving to try and get in. It was a mess. And anyway, I came back and wrote a whole other book and another album about it. I went into hotel quarantine on the way back and wrote a book in 2 weeks. I was just sleeping 2 hours a night. My nervous system was just some intense. It's called Sparrows of Kabul. Yeah, it's on the line, and the book is called The Sparrows of Kabul.
Nice. Just lastly on Afghanistan, when you were there in, let's say, obviously 2020, it was pretty clear getting clearer where things were going. But in the first deployment, you've got this huge base, death by PowerPoint, everyone running around, enormous resources. Was there any consciousness that the Taliban were going to win in the end?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, people who work closely with the Afghan National Security Forces knew that we were creating a structure, I think, that was probably unsustainable. And that was the problem in the end. We built up the Afghan National Security Forces to the tune of 300,000 men, but we built them with an interoperability with our own forces, which meant it was like a Jenga set. When we took our own forces out, we somehow expected the whole thing to stand up, but they'd sort of deployed into forward operating bases in the country. And, we built the Afghan security forces to be dependent on us and to be and concentrated in population centers, which meant that the Taliban, all they needed to do in the end was swarm and surround them. And in the end, the security forces collapsed. Now, some people predicted that. I didn't think I thought it would take longer, but a lot of people were taken by surprise, and maybe that's because people who work on these missions, including me, start to believe in them. You start to. You can't be a colonel or a major or a brigadier, indeed, and send guys to fight for the, possibly and die, if you don't believe in the mission, and that's a virtue, but it's also a blind spot. So maybe there was an extent to which we believed our own reporting.
Yeah, having observed Australia's involvement in peace monitoring and peacekeeping and peace enforcement, essentially, activities over the years, what was your thoughts on those sort of areas of where Australia can contribute to world stability, I guess?
Well, look, when I started doing this sort of work back in 99, 2000, and even in the decade that followed it, here in Canberra, we were very focused on fragile states, and likewise NATO partners. UK had a stabilization unit. The Department of State had a stabilization unit. We were all about stabilizing fragile states in intra-state conflict, civil wars, basically, and that was our concern. But now I can tell you that the Australian national security community is very focused on conflict prevention and deterrence. We're like the birds here. We're a bit worried about the big one and trying to prevent it. And that's the focus now. When I say the big one, I mean World War III.
Sure. I guess lastly, before, because the weather's closing in on us here as well as the birds, did you have a favourite, let's say tank, but vehicle in your travels?
Yeah, well, look, I always found a bit, on the inside, I found tanks a bit pokey, a bit claustrophobic, and the other thing about tanks is because they mess up the grass a lot.
Right.
And so my preference is for the Bushmaster. I think they saved a lot of the Bushmaster built by Raytheon, armored personnel vehicle. Talus. Sorry, yeah.
It's okay, we'll get you back.
Strike me down with a light. Yeah, Talus, an Australian company based in Bendigo, and they just, by some freak of nature and design, they just turned out to be the ideal vehicle for Afghanistan counterinsurgency work. V-shaped hull, saved a lot of lives.
Air conditioning.
Air conditioning. Yeah. It didn't stop me from chundering in one once.
Oh, okay.
I had my helmet on. I just went.
All right. Rob, you got any further questions?
No.
Okay. Well, Fred, thank you so much for coming on the show.
It's been cold and wet, and the ducks have been noisy, but it's an otherwise pleasurable experience.
Thank you, Fred.
Thank you.